Hey guys, Chelsea here, and in this video, I'm actually going to be doing something which I've been doing quite a bit of these now. Basically, I'm going to be looking at the most overhated weapon in each campaign. Now, I've done these on like the most underrated. I've done them on the worst weapons. So I'm just going to do it on the most overhated weapons. And these are weapons I think just don't get the hate that they deserve, and more or less, I think that they should, they should get a lot less hate than they do get. Anyways, with that being said, I'm going to be starting with the campaign I think has the most underhated weapon, and then work my way up to which weapon I think gets the most overrated hate, in my opinion. Anyways, that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Join the Discord if you haven't, and let's start with number 10. Coming in at their cliche spot on this list at number 10 is Tunisia Axis. Again, the problem with Tunisia Axis is that they just get everything they have just works, and really, yeah, it just works.
All of this just works.
But yeah, I had to go with one weapon, and it's Major McDonald's least favourite LMG. It's the ZB-26. Now, basically, with the ZB, the problem with it is that it's twofold. One, the MG34 is unlocked like 10 levels later. B, the Braider is cheaper, albeit worse. And C, it doesn't really have much to stand out from the Braider, other than the fact, well, most people, when they look at the ZB and the Braider, they're like, okay, so you've got at cursory glance, you're like, okay, so this is a 20 round magazine, this is a 20 round magazine, what's the difference? This thing looks uglier. Somehow looks uglier than this thing. But honestly, I think it just gets too much hate, and if we're being honest, this was the only weapon I could think of in Tunisia, for Tunisia Axis, that generally got hate. I think the most problem is that the sights are bad, which they are pretty bad. But the problem with the is that it's actually not a bad LMG. It's okay, but when you're comparing it to something like but people put this over the Braider put this under the Braider for some reason, which I think the Braider is so bad, and this thing, it's okay. Okay, it's an okay. It's a 6, maybe 7 out of 10 LMG. It's along the lines of something like a DP27 it's okay, but it's not a groundbreaking, I'm going to get a billion kills with this LMG, like something like the MG34 or the M19 1986. Anyways, let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9 is Moscow Soviets option, and I'm going to go with actually the PPD-40. Now, the problem with the PPD-40 is the elephant in the room. 4 levels later, you get the PPSH. Now, this is the same in Berlin as well, but in Berlin, the PPD had the advantage of being a 2 silver order weapon, whereas the PPSH is a 3 silver. Whereas this doesn't have that advantage, unfortunately. It's only it's only a 3 silver weapon, which I think is kind of a bit sad. It's also sandwiched between the PPD 34, 38, which is also another drum mag fed SMG, this one being a 2 silver again. So it's kind of in an awkward position. And people will be like, oh, why would you pick the PPD-40 over the PPSH? So I'm going to have to put this one as Moscow Soviets one, because Moscow Soviets, again, they don't have many weapons that get much hate. Maybe the DP27, maybe the Madsen. But even then, they fill their roles. Whereas the PPD, unfortunately, had its role filled twice, and most people will be like looking at this and go, yeah, why would I pick this when the PPSH is literally 4 levels later and the same price? Anyways, let's move on to number 8. Coming in at number 8 is actually Axis Moscow, and I'm gonna go with the MP35 here. Now, the problem with the MP35 in this campaign is, even though it's a great SMG, it's one of the best SMGs in the game, and it is a 3-star SMG. The problem with it is its competition. You're going to be up against the PPDs and the PPSHs when you unlock this thing. And while it is probably the second best Axis SMG in the game after the Korali, it's unfortunately not as good as the PPSH or even the PPD, which is a shame because this thing isn't actually too bad. It's really good, and I think most people realise that this thing is really good, but I've heard people literally say on, not just on all campaigns, not just that this is on, not just Moscow, to avoid this weapon, saying that it's actually pretty bad. To who I say, are we using the same MP35 here? Like, I've sniped people with this thing. This thing is actually, honest to God, one of the most devilishly powerful SMGs, but most people don't put this on the same category as stuff like the PPSH. They don't put it on the same category as the Thompson. Now, I do get why. It's often outshadowed by either the Korali or the MP43, which is fair enough since both of them are better than the MP35. But I think that this thing definitely is overhated for what it is. Anyways, let's move on to number 7. Coming in at number 7 is actually Stalingrad Soviets. Now, their weapon of choice is actually the AVT. Now, the problem with the AVT is, in Stalingrad, it's classed as an automatic. It's classed differently than what it should be. Now, the problem with this is that in Stalingrad, for some reason, the AVT is classed as an assaulter weapon, when in reality, in the other campaign it's in Berlin, it's classed as a select fire rifle. Now, I don't like it being classed as a select fire rifle on normal campaigns, but the problem with this is that the Axis get access to... Now, this can only really be used by engineers, and it can only be used by assaulters, which leads to 2 problems. The first problem is that the assaulters already have the PPSH, which is a better weapon. And the second problem is the Axis at the time get the MKB, which dominates the AVT. So really, this thing is only really good on engineers. And even then, the Axis get a much better weapon. And the problem with it is that the Soviets don't really have a counter to it. This is the only time I think the Soviets don't have a counter to the Axis. Because the Axis also get a PPSH variant, which is the MP717. So, I think this weapon just gets overhated for the fact that it's not useful. Now, I do get why it's overhated, which is why it's coming in at number 7. And I would agree that this thing is definitely underpowered. However, it's Stalingrad, who cares? Anyways, let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6 is Berlin's weapon, which everyone knows it. It's going to be the FG. You knew this weapon would make its appearance on the list. Everyone hates the FG, and for justifiable reason. It basically can do anything at any range. Okay, now I know it did get nerfed with its recoil getting reduced, but even then it's still incredibly powerful. Despite this, however, I still think the FG is probably the most overpowered weapon in the game. It's not the most powerful weapon, but it's definitely the most overpowered weapon. Despite this, however, I still think that it's overhated. People look at the FG and go, oh, the Allies have no counter to it. And honestly, the Allies do have counters in specific situations. The Soviets have the AVS and the AVT, which are both good counters to the FG. And the Allies in Normandy get access to the M2 carbine, which is a perfect counter in close range to the FG. Because by the time the FG can fire a round off, you've already fired 4 off. Because the M2 carbine just shreds. Honestly, the M2 carbine is brutally powerful. It's really underrated. as a select fire weapon. That being said, this thing is still incredibly powerful and deserves all the hate that it gets, but I don't know, I think it's overhated to a degree. Like, it's either, people will say it's either incredibly overpowered to the point of, oh, it's not even, it's so overpowered that, XYZ, or it's so overpowered that the Allies have no counter, Honestly, it's just overhated, and honestly, yeah, it's powerful, but it's not uncounterable anymore. Back in the day, maybe, when people didn't realise how to counter it, then maybe, but nowadays, nah, this thing's counterable. Anyways, let's move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5, we've got Stalingrad. Now, Stalingrad's one was very obvious. It's gonna have to be the MKB. Now, the problem with the MKB is that the reason why it's so hated is that many people go, oh, the Soviets have no real counter to it, which is true to a degree. Yeah, the Soviets' counter to it is definitely inferior to the MKB, but is it really a game-changingly OP weapon? I think yes and no, because yeah, the Soviets have no real counter other than maybe the PPSH, which the Axis have a version of. But again, it's Stalingrad, who gives a shit? Other than that, the MKB is still pretty good, and honestly, I think it does deserve the hate that it gets. Like, this thing really should be an assaulter only weapon, whereas the AVT should be made accessible to all classes. I know they've done this before, as in Normandy, the M1 carbine is on the same level as the FNAB. The FNAB is, of course, a assault weapon only, whereas the M1 carbine is for all classes. So I think they should have done it in that way, but I can understand why they did it the way that they did. And I think people are justified for hating this weapon, to be honest. It's overhated, and I get why, to be honest. Anyways, let's move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is actually Allies Berlin's weapon, and it's the PPSH. Obviously, everyone was going to go, oh, he's going to have the PPSH somewhere in this list. Of course, it had to be somewhere in this list. But it's not going to be this PPSH, it's going to be this PPSH. The PPSH with the box. Now, many people go and be like, oh, the PPSH with the box is rubbish. It's the worst Soviet SMG, which I think is actually false. This PPSH is really good. It's not the worst weapon. It's not as bad as people make it out to be, let's just say that. I've heard people say this thing just sucks as a SMG, that it burns for ammo too quickly, and it doesn't have too much justifiable reasons to be here. And personally, I think they are right, but also wrong. Right as in the, oh, it burns for ammo, but so does the drum. Wrong as in the case of, oh, it's useless. Because the reload speed on this thing is much better than the reload speed of the drum. So you can easily, and these things are really good to whip out in a quick fight. And they're fun to use. They are actually fun to use. The only real problem with the PPSH box is, again, the Soviet competition that they have. It's competing with the PPS 42 and the 43, which are both really good SMGs. And, of course, the PPD with the drum, and, of course, later PPSHs and the FAs. And honestly, I think if this was a 1 silver weapon, I could understand I would probably understand the hate a little bit less, but I think the problem is it's a 2 silver. It's still a really good 2 silver, and it's one of the better 2 silver SMGs, in my opinion. But I think that this thing just gets too much hate. And I think it's overhated for really no real reason. Anyways, let's move on to number 3. We're back at Tunisia for number 3, and this one's easy. It's going to have to be the Vickers. Now, the problem with the Vickers is everyone goes at it First off, people confuse this to the Bren. It's not a Bren, it's a different LMG to the Bren. And everyone looks at it and goes, oh, the Vickers is so bad. And it has some problems. The sights are awful. It doesn't have much ammo. And yeah, really, it's just the sights. Other than that, it's actually not a bad LMG. I think this one's up there as one of the more underrated LMGs. I've heard people say this is the worst LMG in the game other than the Braider. But personally, I think this thing is kind of like the ZB. It's overhated. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. Like, people look at this weapon and go, oh, this thing is so bad. It's the worst, it's the worst LMG in the game, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, I do agree, the sights are awful. I mean, you can look at them right here. That's the sights. They're not that good. Other than that, it's actually not a bad LMG. It's good at mid-range. It's decent at close range. You can hip fire this thing. It's actually not bad. Like, for an early game LMG, it's not too bad. It's not as good as something like, say, another early LMG game LMG, like, say, the MG34 in Berlin. The Bren is better, but it's still solid. And honestly, I think it does not deserve the hate that it gets. Anyways, let's move on to number 2. Yeah, this is the first Normandy mention, and it's number 2. So that means top 2 are going to be Normandy weapons. So, we're going to be starting with Allies, and the Allies, they have a lot of weapons that would probably justify this list. The Bren, obviously the M1 Carbine could make this, the Springfield, but then again the Springfield deserves the hate. No, I'm going to go with the Sten. Now, the problem with the Sten is that many people go, this thing just sucks as an SMG, and it's the worst Allied SMG. To which I reply, have you used the grease guns? These things suck as SMGs. And the Sten is an average SMG, I'd say. This SMG, the problem with it is definitely the 3 silver order price. If this was a 2 silver order, then I could understand it. The hate would probably be a lot less justifiable. But the problem with the Sten is it's a 3 silver order. It's 3 silver orders, and everyone hates the Sten because of it. Now, the main problem with the Sten is, again, the 3 silver orders and the fact that the Lanchester and later Thompson's around the corner. Whereas this thing, it just doesn't really have, much. I think the main problem is most people will be like, oh, it's pretty bad, especially compared to the Axis options, which it's true, it's not as good as the Axis options, but I've said that the Sten is the first actual SMG that the Allies get in Normandy. And it's true as well. I think it just gets too much hate because the Sten, the problem with it is that Allies in Normandy don't get good SMGs until the Sten. So the Sten is often, I'd say it's the first good SMG, and, it's a 3 silver order SMG, which is pretty bad. If it was 2 silver orders, I would see the hate being even less justifiable, but the problem is that most people say that the M3A1 grease gun is actually good. It's not. The M3A1 is actually pretty bad. And also the Lanchester comes quite early. It comes quite early afterwards. Like, it literally goes Sten, 3 levels later Lanchester, 3 levels after that Thompson. And the Thompson just slaps. The Thompson is amazing, whereas the Sten, not so much. Like, the Sten, it's good, but it's not great. It's not I would say it doesn't justify the 3 silver order, but it doesn't deserve the hate that it gets. Like, people say this thing is unusable. It's not. It is usable, and it's pretty good. Like, I still use the Sten in Tunisia to an extent, and it's not too bad, but it's not the worst weapon in the game. Anyways, let's move on to what I think is the most overhated weapon in the game, and I'm pretty sure this one will have no surprise. We all knew it was going to be the Axis in Normandy would get number one because, well, they have a weapon I think does not deserve any hate that it gets. There is a weapon in Axis Normandy that people say cannot be used, is unusable. And the problem with that is that people don't use it correctly. Like, people use this weapon in the worst ways possible, and then they claim, oh, this thing is unusable. And what weapon am I talking about? I'm talking about the Stern pistol. And honestly, this was a clear number one. When I was writing down the notes, the Stern pistol was the first thing that came to mind. I've heard people say that this thing cannot take down vehicles. I've heard people say that this thing cannot be used cannot be used to take down anything. And to which I say, are we using the same Stern pistol here? I've taken out almost every vehicle in the game with this thing. Like, before the Faust came out, I had taken out every vehicle up to that point. And even, like, I'd taken out Panthers with this thing in custom matches. Enchers, I'd taken out Jumbos, I'd taken out pretty much everything. In fact, I've got a video where I was able to mid-cap a Jumbo from, like, 5 miles away. Like, not even 5 miles, it was, like, from about 20 meters away with the Stern pistol. And I generally was like, yeah, this weapon is really good. And people, at the point when I made that video, and still to this day, people were still saying that this thing can't kill any tanks. Like, I was making constant thing, like, for reference, I remember I killed a Jumbo on Ruins of Alps with this thing, and no one was believing me when I said I killed a Jumbo with a Stern pistol. I later was in a match with Quadro, in a call, might I add. I managed to kill a Jumbo with a Stern pistol, and Quadro was like, yeah, you didn't kill it with the Stern pistol, did you? Which was false, I did kill the Jumbo with the Stern pistol, which led me to make the video, which I made about a year ago, where I literally was like, yeah, the Stern pistol can kill Jumbos, here's my proof. I think the Stern pistol is starting to get more love in the community, especially with stuff like the bazooka coming out, where the bazooka can't really kill anything. The M1 bazooka, that is. But I think this thing, the only real problem with the Stern pistol is its reload. Like, the reload takes like 5 years, which I think is the only real thing letting it down. If this reload was about 4 seconds long, I'd say this thing would definitely be unjustifiable. But I think that the real problem is that everyone's like, oh, this Stern pistol is so bad. It isn't. It's a pretty good weapon, which is why it's coming in at number 1 as the most overhated weapon in Enlisted. Anyways, I'm going to end this video here. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments what you guys think. What do you guys think is the most overhated weapon in Enlisted? Join the Discord for if you want to leave some suggestions or just have a few games as well. Like, I play games with a few viewers as well. And I'll see you guys in the next video.